Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, William Travis. They all had their names etched into history at the Alamo, and now so can you. The Alamo is undergoing upgrades and additions that will transform this historic site into a world-class destination, like a state-of-the-art museum, augmented reality experience, and much more. Now, the Alamo needs your donations to meet its goal. You could even have your name on a star at the Visitor Center, or a personalized paver. So you won't just help preserve Alamo history, you'll become part of it. Donate today at thealamo.org.
Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo podcast. Considered the father of Texas, Stephen F. Austin led the Texas Army from Gonzales into San Antonio, bringing the Texas Revolution to the Alamo's doorstep. Today we reveal why Austin was chosen to lead the volunteer army, why he left town on the brink of battle, and the impact he made as the Army took control of the Alamo. I'm your host, Emily Baucom. Today we're joined by the Alamo Senior Curator, Historian, and Lecturer Ernesto Rodriguez. Ernesto, thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Let's begin with an introduction to Stephen F. Austin, known as the father of Texas.
So Stephen F. Austin took over his father's job, which was to bring a group of colonists into Texas. Father had gotten permission under Spanish rule, and when Stephen F. Austin comes in, he takes over, and then he has to renegotiate the contracts. And then in 1824, it's renegotiated again with the Mexican government itself. So he is the father of Texas because he brings the first 300 into Texas as colonists.
The first 300 families, as they're known, and they were brought to the Austin area as we know it today.
Between Austin and Houston, in San Felipe de Austin, the colony that he is going to create. And it's one of those really important groups because this is the first influx of people coming in to help protect the border with the United States.
He supported Santa Anna at first, but became disillusioned when Texas faced barriers becoming its own state.
Yes, he went as far as going to Mexico City to try to convince the Mexican government to give Texas its own statehood. When it was denied, he writes an angry letter complaining about it. It's intercepted, and he's arrested. And so he's in jail. And when he's released from jail, one of the first things he does is he writes another letter, and this one makes it home. It's to Gail Borden, who's running the Telegraph and Texas Register. He's basically saying we must rebel against the current government. And he uses the phrase, war is our only resource, because he's now joining a bigger movement, which is a civil war in Mexico.
He is imprisoned in Mexico City for most of 1834 and doesn't make it home to Texas until August 1835. So that's just as the Texas Revolution is beginning to heat up.
His arrival in Texas and the writing of that letter basically solidifies him as another type of leader. He's no longer just leading a colony. They see him as being the person that may take on this revolt.
And he's elected to command volunteers. How did the Army elect people at that time?
What would happen typically is that there'd be an officer that'd be selected by the men, and then he would tell people, you're a captain, form a company, and so on. Well, they all gather, all these captains gather, and they decide who will lead us. So they have a vote. It was very democratic. They did everything very democratic-like. They voted for almost everything because everyone's voice was important. And they decided to select him to be the leader of the Texan forces unanimously on the field.
So clearly they thought Austin was the best person for the job.
Yes, they did. He had some experience prior to coming to Texas of being in a militia, but he also had experience with leading a colony and negotiating between the colonists of San Felipe and the government in Béjar and the government of Mexico. So he was a political entity that was there to be reckoned with. So he knew how things worked, and he was highly respected.
He was well connected. He knew all the major players. They all knew him.
Yes, he did, and he also spoke the language.
We talked about this on the last episode with Dr. Winders. In these early days of the Revolution, there was still some hope of reinstating the Mexican Constitution of 1824 and perhaps finding a path forward for Texas as still part of Mexico.
There's two parties that are at play here in Texas. It's the War Party and the Peace Party. The Peace Party wants to continue with the status quo to establish the Constitution of 1824 because, things were great, right? You think about it, under that Constitution, you're basically living under almost the same form of government that you had in the United States. And you're so far north that you can basically do as you please until you're being watched by the government in Mexico City. The other party wanted to get independence because they saw returning to the way it was not as profitable for the people of Texas, where you could self-govern. And you think about what had happened almost 60 years before is the American Revolution. And guess what? They started to fight against a government that was unjust, and they saw that connection. So the war party starts to really take off, but it isn't until after the Battle of Bear that it truly gains the momentum.
And we're still talking fall of 1835, so right after the Battle of Gonzales. Why did Austin lead his volunteer army to San Antonio?
It was just a natural progression because, well, you've taken Gonzales. They were able to take Goliad. Well, now you have the stronghold, which is San Antonio or Bejar. And here's where the main fort is. Here's where basically the government is housed, especially not only military, but the civilian government. And so it was a perfect move because if you control this, you can force their hand. And that's what he's trying to do. And they make their way to San Antonio and they start laying siege to this area.
When did they arrive?
They arrive in late October.
So that's when the siege of Bejar begins.
What happens when you have a group of young men that are in your army? Well, they start trying to, you hear about, well, I signed up because of the Battle of Gonzales and we're here to fight. We took Goliad and we're here to fight. So there's several skirmishes around the area. Grass fight, Battle of Concepcion. One of the things that we don't talk about a lot is on November 8th, you have the capture of the Remuda by William Byron Travis, which he captures a large herd of horses for the Alamo cavalry. All these things are happening, and they're all in the favor of the Texan forces.
But right before the siege of Bejar hits the brink of battle, Austin leaves town. Where does he go?
He is sent to the United States. He goes to New Orleans, and one of the things he's doing is he's working as a diplomat, an emissary for Texas to promote the cause of Texas, to bring aid to Texas. And who better than the man that had talked to both sides to bring colonists into Texas. And so he is one of those people that becomes an important figure that is no longer active in the campaign, but he's active in getting us everything we need to continue on.
So kind of an ambassador role.
Mm-hmm.
But how does him leaving town impact the army?
With his leaving, now they have to decide who they're going to elect as their next officer. And this time it's a man by the name of Edward Burleson. And Edward Burleson will be the guy that takes over. He's a different type of leader, right? And so same things start to happen, right? People are noticing that, you signed up for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year. Winter's coming. What do you do? So they start figuring out what's the next step, and they vote again, and they decide they want to go to winter quarters. So they're going to leave the campaign during the winter and move back to the other settlements. And that's the problem because you have victory, 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 and now you're just backing off. So it stirs up the pot a little, and that's when a man by the name of Ben Milam comes on the scene, and he helps nudge them into the next phase.
He calls for volunteers.
Yes, he does. And he actually calls for volunteers by drawing a line in the sand with a rifle, according to what they say. And he tells them who will go with old Ben Milam into San Antonio. And 301 men say, I will.
This week, 190 years ago, the Battle of Bejar takes place in downtown San Antonio, essentially the area between the Alamo and San Fernando Cathedral, from December 5th through December 9th, 1835.
Yes, it is. And it's one of those pivotal moments in our history that many people don't really know about because it's pre-March 6th.
We talk a lot about the Battle of the Alamo that was such a decisive loss, but Texas had this huge win, just footsteps from the Alamo a couple of months before.
Yes, and it's one of those victories that is very interesting because Texas wins at this battle. When they win, their negotiation or the capitulation of the Mexican army, their surrender, has a lot of interesting things in it. And one of them is, if you see a Mexican soldier, you should be basically peaceful and nice to them. One of the parts of it is they allow the Mexican army to return to the interior of the republic with the promise of not to take up arms against those that defend the Constitution of 1824. So the war party hasn't really won yet. Peace party is still holding its ground. But things will change because with this victory and the withdrawal of the Mexican army across the Rio Grande, the Alamo falls into the hands of the Texans for the first time.
We're going to talk about this on upcoming episodes as we get deeper into the Texas Revolution time period. But the Texans do a lot at the Alamo over the next few months.
Yes, they do. One of the things is that the Mexican army had started fortifying the fort. But now you have to think about, can this site be defended? The engineers here, one of them says, well, we cut it and make it into a square. It'll be more defensible, but that's also not doable because it takes a lot of time and effort. But you also have to think, what do we need to be able to sustain ourselves? Can we sustain ourselves? And it leads to this debate in government itself. Is the Alamo worth defending? And in the end, you will end up with a commander of the garrison and a gentleman that comes in. So it's James Bowie and James Clinton Neal, who's the commander of the Alamo garrison, that will make a decision and they'll write a letter. We would rather die in these ditches than give it up to the enemy. This site, along with Goliad, sit on the San Antonio River line. And when you think about it in that way, the San Antonio River is the division between the interior of Mexico and the colonies. So you must defend it.
And the San Antonio River, it must be said, would have looked a lot different. When we think about it today, I think we have this tendency to think about the man-made river walk. It wasn't like that back then.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a river you could actually navigate with a big boat, but it was still a force to be reckoned with. And we had the river walk because of that, because it's a force to be reckoned with. But that San Antonio River line is really important because it is a direct defensive line that you want to protect because the roads to Texas come through both sites. And so Goliad and San Antonio are the two places that sit on the roads that come in. And so you control those, you control how the battles are going to go.
You can really see in December 1835 how Austin and the Army, they're taking separate paths. Let's start with Austin. Where does he go throughout the Revolution?
The way that Austin will travel, it'll be basically he's in San Felipe to Gonzales, Gonzales to San Antonio after visiting Goliad shortly, but he's making his way here. And the letters he's writing are basically always asking for help for the army. Santa Anna, on the other hand, is marching north. And he's coming and he's marching from Mexico City and he's subduing revolts. That's what he's been doing because Mexico is in full civil war. He's subduing the revolts as he's leaving. He ends up getting to Zacatecas, destroys that revolt, ends up moving his troops, and they're all gathering. Cavalry unit has actually crossed into Texas when the Battle of Bear happens, and they return with the retreating Mexican army. But he's got his armies basically starting to gather right near the Rio Grande. He's still down in San Luis Potosí because he becomes ill, so he holds his troops back. What would have happened had he had his troops march without him would be a different story. But it's a longer trek. Supply lines are long. And so they're struggling to get here. He does force them up, 29 days to force the troops 400 miles. That's fast, but you need time to rest. You need supplies. And that's what's taking a while. And with the siege that will come in March, he's basically setting everything up for the final assault.
And then the Texas Army. Next week, we'll talk about how some of them tried again to take the fight down into Mexico. But some of the Army, as we know, stays here in San Antonio, setting the stage for what happens in just a few months at the Alamo.
Because one of the things that happens with the attempt to take the war to Mexico is they take supplies, they take men, and what are the two things you need to defend the fort? Supplies and men.
The title of this episode is called Austin's Texian Army. He led it for a short time, but had a big impact. How would you describe that impact?
His impact was great because he was one of those people that was always trying to be level-headed and seeing the big picture and what's best for Texas. And if we look at Austin, and you think about, had he survived past December of 36, who knows what role in government he would have had. We could have had Austin as president. And it would have, he was one of those highly respected individuals that for a while they looked at him like, well, you're siding with Mexico. But then when he noticed that it wasn't the right thing to do, he becomes their leader. And for someone to be taken out of the field and then put to be the ambassador, basically, that's an interesting role because they knew what his strength was. His strength was communication.
Ernesto Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to an essay by former Alamo curator Dr. Bruce Winders about why the San Antonio area was considered the key to the Texas Revolution. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.